Okay, well, a big thank you for having me. I'm always very excited to be able to share on these platforms that we probably wouldn't be able to normally have if we were not having lockdown face to face. Okay, so yeah, just going to chat briefly about some of the articles that I contribute towards Rolling Kids, which is an editorial for children with disabilities. And let me see if I can make sure that I can go to the next screen. Sorry, so go onto here. There we go. Okay, so before I start, I just want to give you a little bit of contextual background to me and my family. So I live disability. I'm hard of hearing, and my husband, Vic McKinney, some of you might know him. Yeah, so he's a C3 quadriplegic, and I've got two boys, which keep us on our toes. And so we've got Jamie on the left, and he's got a neurological disability. He's got a thing called Tourette syndrome, as well as a brain tumor. And my monkey on the right, he hopes he has a disability one day, he tells us, because it's not fair. If 3 out of 4 have it, that's just not fair. So a bit of an odd family dynamic. And yeah, just listening to Ari this morning talking about just living with disability and bowel and bladder, and how it's just so vital. So thank you so much, Ari. You spoke to me this morning, so thank you so much. Okay, so as I said, I've been contributing since 2013 on a Rolling Kids little editorial, and we focus on a range of different topics and relating to parents, therapists, so support workers, for example, carers, facilitators, if you have a facilitator in the classroom, teachers, your classroom assistants, as well as government departments like DSD, as well as the Department of Education, as well as NGOs and disabled people's organizations as well. So I tried to give it quite a practical angle, rather just a theoretical academic, which I may be, but having to make sure that I can bring it down to the level of the different audiences and hopefully have, yeah, it's very difficult to try cram so much into one editorial, but that's why sometimes I do a continuation of a couple of editions. Yeah, and so topics that we've covered are relating to teachers and teachers in mainstream classes as well, because we've got inclusive education policy now, which really encourages children with disabilities to be in regular mainstream classrooms. But then in order to do that effectively, we need to make sure that our teachers have some skills, and many of them don't have trainings or understanding about disability and can be quite overwhelmed and scared. So I've been trying to give some sort of real basic practical tips. So for example, how to adapt your classroom, and like, so where your seating arrangements are, how you teach, how you fully integrate children. I mean, obviously this is focusing on physical disabilities, but there are other tips you can apply to any disability. So like seating arrangements. Some children need to transfer onto regular chairs, others don't. So just a whole lot of practical tips there. Using music within your classroom and making sure that the instruments that you use are recyclable, as well as can be made out of recyclable materials, as well as accessible to children who might not be able to necessarily be able to bang on a drum like everybody else. So just making adaptations to musical instruments, focusing on the importance of play for all children, because people, okay, play is important, but not really for children with disabilities. They're the others. No, absolutely, children with disabilities benefit as much as everybody else do. Importance of play, games and activities to develop gross and fine motor coordination and skills, and visual perceptual skills as well, because often it's no shame, the poor disabled children, just leave them to do their own thing. No, they need to develop their skills the way all other children do, but possibly with a little bit of adaptations, which I've included some practical tips there. Also for teachers on class outings. So if we are trying to be inclusive, we need to make sure that our class outings and excursions are accessible to children with disabilities. Yeah, it's all about true inclusion rather than just faking it till you bake it. And yeah, also some writing tips as well. So this would be how to adapt pens, how to adapt desks, how to adapt paper. Yeah, so practical tips there. For parents as well, it's really important that if we look at supporting the education of children, it doesn't only happen in school. We need to transfer the skills back to parents, making sure that they have some tips that they can do, reinforce things at home. So practical ideas and tips to help children using games and activities, for example, adapting painting, using recyclables as well, and ADL activities as well. Early stimulation activities. So these are for our littlies. It's really, really important that we look at early stimulation activities and how to adapt toys and games to accommodate children with a variety of different disabilities. And remember, every single child is different. Every child is unique. And we need to make sure that we accommodate a range of disabilities, and focusing on strengths. What can the child do? And then what can we do to adapt to make sure that they can fully participate? Yeah, and then also giving parents some tips on how to integrate their children into a mainstream school, if that is where they want their child to be. And then some little tips to keep our kids busy during holidays and things. Get some festive baking activities, decorations, paper chains. So it's not only academic and practical, there's some fun things thrown in there too. And also for me, it's very important that we represent people with disabilities. And so do some interviews with adults with disabilities, where they reflect back on their personal journeys of going through an education system. So some of them had acquired disabilities, so they were talking about their transition as now being people with disabilities from an educational point of view. And others that went to special schools or that went to a mainstream school by default with no accommodations. And it was just really important to get their views and tips and recommendations that they feel parents and teachers and therapists would need to know, and what would have made their lives easier and better. So it's just important, that whole slogan, nothing about us without us. It's really important that personal accounts are shared. So we had a couple of interviews there. And yeah, just to show this is a drawing that my eldest drew of our family. So obviously Vic is a wheelchair user, and just trying to normalize disability is really, really important. So here you'll see a smiling family, and dad's in the front of the picture, and he's big, and yeah, you can see boys love electrical things. So we had to put a Jimmy switch onto Vic's chin control to stop our children from driving into poles. But just looking at how important normalizing disability is, to make sure that it's just a part of everyday experience, and why should our people with disabilities be hidden and stigmatized in society. So I just thought this would be a nice picture show of just the importance of dad in this particular picture. Okay, it's also really important in my mind to understand policy. So we've got fantastic Education White Paper 6, which was our inclusive education policy. We've got the United Nations Convention on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, UNCRPD. And we've got some looking at practically how do we integrate and accommodate children with disabilities into anyone requiring additional support. We've got a Department of Education CS document, which are fantastic. But how do we practically use these documents to be able to give access to our children who require support? So I've been trying to take some of those and apply them practically in the classroom for teachers. For example, if a child needs additional support, the teacher needs support. What support is available? What documents do they need to complete? What is school-based? What is district-based? Yeah, so just really unpacking. I spent 3 different editions looking at the different steps and how can we provide support to our learners as well as our teachers, because without teacher support, it's going to fail. So yeah, just looking at how we can use these documents. And then I thought, okay, maybe I can just throw it in because we're in COVID, and some tips and ideas. Many of our parents are really scared, especially with children with disabilities. Okay, I'm not going to, my child's due for vaccination, but actually I'm just going to let it slide. And that's not necessarily only for children with disabilities. Parents are all very scared. But we need to make sure that we keep up our vaccinations, that we keep our healthcare appointments, and make sure that if you're having therapy, we might need to do it in a slightly different way. And obviously you need to make sure that PPE is used, that you are safe, your child is safe. But where possible, it's really, really important to get especially if you've got a young child, that early intervention is key. And taking 8 months off can make a significant impact on the child's development. Yeah, and as I said, don't stop therapy, just look at alternative forms. And this is government as well as private as well. Just chat to your therapist. Is there something I can do at home? Is there, what can I practically do? So some people are fortunate enough to have platforms like Zoom, which do child data, but we need to look at alternative ways of making sure that therapy can continue. So rather than it being done by the therapist or the teacher in the classroom, we need to be looking at what can parents do? How can we empower parents to be able to still continue to support their children? Many children really, really benefit from keeping routines consistent. So like every day, this is what we're going to do. And it also just helps to give a flow and a structure to the day. And also, I know that we were in a complete bubble because Vic is unable to cough. And it was interesting to hear some of the speakers this morning talking about if Vic were to have contracted the virus, he would have had to go into hospital without his carers. He's got 24-hour care. and who would turn in every 2 hours to prevent pressure sores, as was mentioned this morning. Who would be there to do bowel and bladder routines? Who would be there to feed him? If he can't cough, as I said, he can't cough. We help him to cough in a different way. Would the healthcare professionals be able to do that? And we were just so worried about that because of the secondary complications, as you was mentioning this morning, your pressure sores, and more risk of dying from other complications than possibly COVID. So we kept our boys at home for 8 months, which was really difficult, having to work full time and parent and a million other things. But getting my children involved in housework, cleaning, gardening, I think they've gained many skills to set them up for future relationships, giving them the skills now. So it's about just getting them involved, and even by moving, by sweeping, you're developing skills. You're using your fine gross motor for picking up things, and to turn it into a fun activity would be some tips that I'd give. Okay, and other activities, painting activities, doing things at home. Share I include this picture of my boys painting with dad. Vic paints with his mouth. My boys in the beginning didn't realize that you can actually paint with your hands. Because they see Vic painting and they just assume that everyone else holds pens and paintbrushes in their mouths. So that was just an interesting pick there. And again, some things, just keeping children busy with doing different things. Painting or drawing is really, really important. And if you are able to get out and make sure that when you do go out with your family and your children with disabilities, just make sure that you're safe, that you're following social distancing. This was before lockdown, but just find things that are accessible, to do things as a family, because your mental well-being is really, really key and important as well. Can't always be locked in. It depends on if we're going to go back up to higher levels, then we need to renegotiate. But just finding safe spaces that are accessible and safe for you and your family is a really important thing to do. And just some tips that we've been doing, really spending 5 minutes a day, just doing something constructive with our children. So individually, we've been focusing on just spending special time, whether we're doing Lego or whether we're exploring something garden, phones off, phones away, no digital media, and just focus 100% on them. It's just really, really important for building relationships and making special time. And that was just really, really important for us and helped us to get through our lockdown. And then I just decided to add a little bit after this morning's presentation on the triage policy within, looking at when resources are scarce, and we have, so basically they're not. And that was really fascinating for me because actually I have, so this is our CCSA, allocation of scare critical care resources during COVID-19. And this is the triage policy that we were talking about, that was mentioned this morning. And yes, well, I understand there are some, yes, triage is important because there isn't enough, there aren't enough beds, and what happens if there are too few ventilators. But why should a person with a disability be excluded based on his disability? What about his, look at Vic, he's a lecturer, he's got his PhD, he's a dad, he contributes to society, he contributes to the economy. Why should he be excluded purely based on his physical disability? And so this is a flow chart saying, does he meet this requirement? Yes, no, then you move on to the next flow chart. But just to have a look at, this is what we had the issue with. Specifically was the frailty clinical really frail, completely dependent on personal care. So as I said, Vic, 24 hours we need, doesn't need the carers in his space all the time, but he is reliant on care. So he'd be classified as someone with a scale of 7. Okay, so, and this is even if he is seen stable and not at high risk of dying within 6 months. Vic is healthy. He's had a couple of pressure sore issues during COVID, but other than that, he is healthy. But based purely on this the scale, he would not be, he would not be able to be into, if there's a shortage, he would not be able to get into, so if we have, I've just zoomed it up a bit. Okay, so you'll see, if you have a frailty score of below 7, you are straight away excluded. So that's frailty score of 6 or above, you are directly excluded. So you would have to go, you would not be allowed into ICU. So this is really, really sad, and this was just really worrying for us in terms of discussion of end of life issues with the next of kin. No, why should my husband's life be seen as less valuable and less important to save? So we were really angered by this, and just the fact that this, yes, I completely understand that our healthcare workers are completely stretched to capacity, but this is a really important document. This is a guide that was developed. And so we went, and a good friend of ours, Professor Leslie Swartz from Stellenbosch University, an incredible academic in terms of disability studies. He's done amazing things. And the three of us got together, and that's just to show the frailty score. Would not be able to access, would not receive ICU bed or ventilators, just purely based on his physical disability. So we were really unhappy with that. We looked at the frailty score and the triage policy, thought this is not okay. And just chatting to academics, chatting to medical professionals, and we never thought about it that way. And so we went and wrote an article and published in the Mail and Guardian, Vic and Leslie and myself, and just to create awareness. And we did many interviews on the radio saying, actually, this is not okay. And as a result, I put them many platforms as well. And we also went and published an article in the African Journal of Disability. And we also, and a couple of other articles, it's been accepted in a couple of other journals, and we're looking at book chapters as well. South African Health Review asked us to write something as well. And we can't say that it was us that had an impact on the triage policy, but it has changed based on the disabled people's movement in the UK. As well as academics, as well as advocates, and other people fighting for the rights of people with disabilities in South Africa, as someone mentioned this morning, we all got together and said this is not okay. And so as a result, the triage policy has changed, and they're no longer excluding based purely on your physical disability. But just the fact that people just don't know, they aren't educated enough, they've got a lot of things on their plate. And it's how do we, yes, so in terms of we can't shout and scream because it's going to get people's backs up, but actually this is a human rights issue. We are all seen as equal. The Constitution of the Republic of South Africa is really great, but we're supposed to have access to healthcare. Now, if we don't have access to healthcare, how can we are being discriminated against? So it was trying to write it in an unemotional way, giving the facts, and we're also thrilled that the triage policy has changed. But now with the next possible wave, we need to make sure that these are implemented, that the healthcare workers are made aware of triage policies and how people with disabilities have the right to access healthcare. And that's me. So thanks for your time. Sorry, it was a whirlwind Zoom through things. Just thanks for your time.